Okay, welcome to Precis Talks. The topic for this subject is "The funnel is dead?" And to elaborate a bit on that, what might be dead is the historical way we've looked upon upper funnel, middle funnel and lower funnel, and how different channels fit into those categories. And the way of approaching those channels in that mix and how we should evaluate those channels. As well as what has changed over the past 5 to 10 years, what's different now in this mix of channels compared to how it was in the past. And we're also going to talk about what competencies are likely needed in this new ecosystem of channels. If you look at the differences, what would you like to highlight as some of the main things that are different today in comparison to, say, 5 or 10 years ago? What would you like to?
I think there are many things different, but picking a couple of obvious ones, I would say number one, the measurability of things. So I think in the past we've had to guess more, will this work, and sort of default to asking, what do you think, Kristoffer, or what do you think, etc. And now we can test much more. We don't need to guess. We can test with a sub-segment, we can test with a new media, we can test with whatever we want. So I think that's also why I printed this t-shirt, don't guess, test. I think that's one of the key messages is we need to stop guessing and start testing more when it comes to making the most of different types of media throughout the funnel. And the questions in the sort of different teams working on this needs to move from what do you think to how can we test this? So I think that measurability is, I think, one of the key things changing. And then obviously the other thing is the automation aspect. Like much more is automated now because of the huge amount of data available and signals available. So we are going to move more and more from sort of activity-based marketing to outcomes-based marketing and focus more on being the best people in the world of setting the right targets rather than being the best people in the world on buying the right media placement.
I agree, and related to this, like how it used to be and how it is now, if you look at the old way of doing, for example, upper funnel, say some traditional channels like TV, print, radio, I think there were obviously back then and still is more limited abilities to even evaluate and do the kind of testing we want to achieve normally today.
Yeah.
And in some sense, that kind of mindset has been inherited to today's upper funnel channels like YouTube and Facebook and display, to the point where there might have been a bit too much focus on pure reach metrics and eyeballs. When really today, this the way I see it, no really any excuse not to, for example, develop robust KPI frameworks or evaluate or do A/B tests and look at the incrementality of adding investments in one channel and so on. And I would like to argue also that the old distinction we have between performance channels and other channels, where typically performance channels is lower funnel, SEM, is no longer valid, because all marketing is performance marketing in my view. It's just a matter of the KPI that's the input for that engine. Which also kind of relates to the pure technical changes that, for example, YouTube has undergone development over the last 5 years or so, where today you can actually steer a channel like that towards short-term sales if you want to, or you can even use SEM as a brand awareness channel, which is different today. So I think, and that relates to this whole upper and lower mid-funnel thinking, where you can assume that this channel belongs in upper funnel, and commonly let's look at it from like a reach perspective, and vice versa for lower funnel. And I think that's something that's already changing, but should probably change even more at a faster pace.
Yeah, and I think you're onto something there, because we talk about sort of the 3 steps of making sense of measurement. So I think step 1 is you need to figure out the ownership in your organization. Who owns measurement? Quite often that's sort of silofied in different parts of the organization, and we often argue that it makes sense to have some sort of measurement lead, measurement owner, overlooking the entire funnel or sort of consumer experience and user experience, customer experience, call it what you want, but someone who takes that full breadth of ownership. And then number 2, as you were getting to the KPI framework, where at minimum you need to have 2 KPIs, one for the short term, one for the long term. One for the short term, we used to dabble around with proxy KPIs, where now we can move towards business KPIs for the short term, like be it gross profit too or whatnot. Whilst for the long term, you probably need something along the lines of branding KPI, consideration lift or whatnot, but at minimum those two. So that's step 2, making sense of the KPI framework, and then step 3, investing in analytics tools. I mean, you need to start measuring, and not because it will be perfect, because measurement is never perfect, so we need to sort of let go of that idea, but say, let's try to be less wrong every single day. And I think if you have that clear ownership, if you have that clear KPI understanding and framework, and then if you have the tools, then you can really start testing and experimenting and learning about what media goes where, in what funnel, in what channel, etc., etc.
And obviously that's true regardless of the channel. Like it doesn't matter if it's YouTube or if it's SEM. That same approach should be holistic across your mix, obviously. And I think that's the shifts we're seeing today. But it's definitely has gone slower in some channels in comparison to others. Where, for example, SEM has always been under like performance evaluation pressure in some sense because it was measurable. Whereas other channels that are harder to quantify, we cannot let go of those because they're more difficult. Is my point.
Yeah, and we haven't invested probably as much in more traditional channels in the measurement sort of setup to make it more measurable. But I think one other important aspect you were getting to is that different channels develop at different speed, but today a lot of channels develop really fast. So let's say you tried using something like online video to drive sales 1 year ago, and it didn't work. Then 2 things on that one. First one is mindset-wise, did you design an if test or a how test? Did you design if online video can drive sales, or did you design how online video can drive sales? So I think that's one aspect. And the second one is, even though it didn't work 1 year ago, it's probably worth trying again because the development of many channels is so fast. So you need to have this continuous pace of testing and learning and testing and learning. And I think that's a process that every company needs to build for themselves.
I agree. Okay, so if we look at, like, obviously we have like a channel mix that's very different today from say 10 years ago, and it's arguably getting more and more complex, like more touch points, and not only like what's available, but also how people navigate towards, for example, a conversion decision. What are you thinking around how we're going to deal with this increased complexity of understanding user journeys in this new reality?
We will not be able to fully understand user journeys because there are going to be as many user journeys as there are users. So I think we need to aggregate that understanding somehow, and I think that's where audiences come in. So starting to aggregate different audiences. If you are a retailer, then I think it's quite important for you to know sort of which of 20% of your audience is going to generate your 60% of profit. That's going to be an important sort of audience segment to understand. And then looking at that audience segment, what is the different behaviors throughout the sort of journey for them? Because if you don't understand that, but your competitor understand which 20% drives that 60% of profit, you are probably at a disadvantage. So let's say, for example, hypothetically, that a big global online retailer enters your market, and they take 10% of your customers. In the start, it may feel okay, but that's okay. 10% loss, we can live with that. But if those 10% represents 50% of your profit, that's going to be a problem, within a quite short time period. So, understanding sort of what are the commonalities of the user journeys of your most profitable customers, I think it's a use case worth exploring.
Yeah, and this kind of ties into what we call algorithm proofing, that what you actually feed into the model is key. So you could have the most advanced and comprehensive attribution model in the world, like you connect the dots as good as you can across channels, and you understand how channels interrelate. But if you're still at the point of, say, a purchase or conversion, are not really measuring the full value of that event, which you are optimizing everything towards, then it doesn't matter, you're going to be off anyway. So with algorithm proofing, we're we're usually talking about what's that input value to the machine. Say it's the optimization engine you use to allocate budgets between and within channels, for example. And you really need to know say you have an e-commerce at a transaction point, what's that, if it's a new customer, what's that new customer worth over time? Or if it's a returning customer, what's that customer going to be worth from this point and onwards? And tying that back into your whole engine, which is really a user-centric approach rather than putting the focus too much on this channel, followed by this channel, followed by this channel, generates this kind of value. That is arguably even more important, that the data you are gathering is as comprehensive as possible. And it kind of ties back into this thinking that we need to probably move away from these channels are meant for engaging people in this decision stage, and these channels are meant for engaging people in this later decision stage. Instead, have this user-centric approach foremost, and then figure out how to engage with them across the entire marketing mix you leverage.
Yes, and being clear about what success looks like. And I think that's where marketing and the finance function in all companies needs to work much closer together, because it should really be a conversation between the CFO and CMO and the business controller and the marketing team around, lifetime value. What lifetime value time horizon can we afford to look at based on our sort of cash flows? Like what's our limit as to what we define as a lifetime, and so on and so forth, so that you are in a place where you are so confident in the targets that you've set, where you're so confident in the data driving that decision-making process, so that you actually dare to sort of floor the gas pedal of growth, because you know that you will grow in a sort of financially sustainable way.
Another question we have is, what's the role of people in this new reality? Like what kind of competences are we looking at, probably even now, but also in the future, when we have this more advanced ecosystem of user journalism channels and all the things we discussed?
That's a really core question, I think, because ultimately we are people doing the job. So I think step one is, as a marketeer, is internalizing the fact that the world will keep changing. It will be a moving target as to where you added value as a person versus a computer, for example. And because that is the fact, you as a marketeer have a role to first and foremost invest in your lifelong learning. So step one, the role of a marketeer is to always know what you're going to learn next week, because if you don't know that, then you're leaving learning to chance rather than to design. Then step two is making sure that your customer data is as great as it can be, and that you have the different use cases that you want to do. Step three is getting into the mindset of testing and getting that testing schedule in place, because that you can do. So the role of the marketeer will be to make sure that you continue learning, make sure that you're clear about what you're trying to achieve in an automated world, because otherwise you will automate really wrong really fast, and then make sure that you have the customer data to sort of fuel that and the testing schedule to move forward. And then finally, I would say, the more repetitive the task, the more you should probably let a machine do that for you. The more seldom the task, like merging two big data sets or whatever, it's better for you.
Yeah, that's a good rule of thumb, I think. Like always look at things you're doing and see if a machine could do it as efficiently or more efficiently than you, then they should probably do it, so you can gear your time towards the things you're talking about there. Thanks a lot, Johan.
Thanks
for coming in.
Thank you.